All right, you probably know me as mathematics, but let me tell you something. Before I was this grand concept, an idea or that subject you maybe dreaded in school, I was a crisis. Yeah, a full blown crisis. My story, it doesn't begin in the quiet mind of some philosopher staring up at the heavens. Nope. It begins in the mud and the chaos of the world's very first great city. I was born from pure, desperate necessity. So I want you to picture this. We're going back to 3200 BCE, to a city called Uruk, in what's now modern-day Iraq. Now this wasn't just some town. At the time, it was the largest city on the entire planet, a sprawling, booming metropolis, the first of its kind. And it was right here, not in some peaceful library, not in a university, but in a noisy, frantic, probably smelly temple storeroom. That's where I was actually born. And every origin story needs a hero, right? Well, meet mine. His name was Kushum. Now, Kushum wasn't a king. He wasn't a great warrior or a wise high priest. No, he was an accountant, and he was having a very, very bad day. I mean, we're probably talking the worst month of his entire professional life. But here's the thing. His problem? It was about to change the world. Forever. So what was this huge, world-changing problem? It boils down to this number, 40,000. That's how many people lived in Uruk. The city had absolutely exploded in size. It was this incredible success story, right? But that success was creating this massive, unprecedented crisis. All the old, simple ways of keeping track of things, the stuff that worked just fine for a small village, they were completely catastrophically failing. They just couldn't handle the scale of a real city. I mean, Kushum was literally drowning in data. But his data wasn't on a spreadsheet. No, his world was a nightmare of clay and chaos. Imagine thousands upon thousands of tiny clay shapes, these little tokens. The temple storerooms were just overflowing with sealed clay envelopes, and each one was stuffed with these physical records. Every single transaction, a farmer bringing in grain, a worker getting their daily ration, was a separate physical object. It was an absolute logistical nightmare. See, their whole system wasn't really based on counting as we think of it. It was based on matching. You'd have, say, a cone-shaped token, and that was basically a grain thing. A little cylinder? That was a sheep thing. A sphere was an oil jar thing. They had a completely different physical token for every single commodity. The wild part is, the very idea of an abstract number, it just didn't exist yet. And this is the part that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. They could hold, say, 10 sheep tokens in their hand, but they didn't have the abstract idea of 10. The concept of a tenness, an idea that could apply to sheep or jars of oil or days in a week, that just hadn't been invented. They were literally counting things without numbers as you understand them. Okay, so let's get back to Kushum, sitting there in his office, surrounded by all this clay chaos. He's holding one of these sealed clay envelopes. Now, if he wants to check what's inside, to verify the shipment, he has to smash it open. But then, poof, the record is gone. It's destroyed. And then, in this moment of peak frustration, a totally radical thought hits him. A simple question that was about to spark a revolution. And this was his stroke of genius. It came in two parts. First, he thinks, what if I press the tokens into the outside of the wet clay envelope before I seal it up? Boom. Now you've got a permanent, external record of what's inside. But then came the second, even bigger leap. He looks at it and thinks, hang on a second. If the impressions on the outside are the real record, why do I even need the tokens on the inside at all? Why not just have a flat tablet of clay with the impressions on it? Right there, in that moment, Kushum created something absolutely monumental. He probably had no idea, but he was holding humanity's very first written document. And I'll tell you right now, it wasn't what you probably think it was. It wasn't some epic poem about heroes and gods. It wasn't a sacred law code or a prophecy from the heavens. Nope. The reason we invented writing, the whole reason we started making language permanent was, well, it was a lot more practical than all that. Writing was invented to do my job. It was invented for accounting. Let that sink in. The poem came way, way after the spreadsheet. The first written documents in human history, they were receipts, tax records, and inventory lists. One of the first sentences we ever wrote down was basically the ancient equivalent of item, barley, quantity, 37 measures, received by Kushum. And once this idea was out there, boy, it evolved fast. Over just a couple of centuries, you can see the whole progression. First, scribes went from pressing the actual tokens into clay to just drawing little pictures of the tokens. Makes sense, right? Then, eventually, those pictures got simpler and simpler until they became these abstract wedge-shaped symbols we call cuneiform. Every single step was a move away from a physical thing and one step closer to a pure, abstract idea. And that right there, that was the true revolution. For the very first time, I could exist all on my own. The idea of, say, 23 could be written down and understood as a concept, totally separate from 23 sheep, or 23 jars of oil, or 23 anything. The quantity was finally free from the thing being counted. I was born. So now that they had these abstract numbers, the Sumerians built this incredibly sophisticated system to use them. Now today, we mostly use a base 10 system, right? Probably because we have 10 fingers, makes sense, but the Sumerians, they went with base 60. It sounds a little strange to us, but it was actually a brilliant choice. See, 60 can be divided by a whole bunch of other numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, you name it. That made it super flexible and really powerful for doing calculations. And if you're thinking, okay, base 60, ancient history, who cares? Well, think again. Every single time you look at a clock, you're using their system. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, that's Sumerian math. 360 degrees in a circle, that's them too. The ghost of Kushum's accounting office is literally sitting right there on your wrist. But my birth, it did more than just create writing. It created a completely new kind of power. And with that power came a new social divide. For the first time in history, society basically split into two groups, those who could understand and use me, and those who couldn't. The people who were mathematically literate became the planners, the engineers, the architects, the administrators. They were the ones giving the orders. And everyone else? Well, they were the ones following them. You know, we always think of empires being built by great warriors and powerful kings, but the real truth? They're built by accountants. Every pyramid, every great temple, every ziggurat, every single one of those ancient wonders stands on a foundation of boring, mundane logistics, inventories, and careful calculation. The glory of empire rests on the work of counting. In a very real way, the spreadsheet has always been mightier than the sword. So this new system was incredibly powerful, but it wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. It could handle whole things beautifully. 5 sheep, 10 barrels of oil, no problem. But my very existence created a new, really thorny problem that would haunt people for centuries. What happens when you have to divide? What do you do when things aren't whole? Now, the Sumerians, they were clever. They came up with ways to handle fractions using their base 60 system. But there was something else lurking just beneath the surface. A much deeper and, frankly, more terrifying problem. It was a secret that would eventually unravel entire philosophies and launch my next great revolution. It was the discovery that some numbers, even some really simple, everyday quantities, they couldn't be written as a fraction at all. They were irrational. And that, well, that's a story for another time.